The ballroom shimmered under golden lights, every chandelier flickering like it had been staged for royalty. Donald Trump strode in with his trademark swagger, the room erupting in applause as though the very walls were trained to cheer. His smile was broad, almost rehearsed, every step choreographed to match the myth of his own invincibility. Beside him, Ivanka glided in, polished, poised, the perfect extension of his curated image. Together they presented what his followers loved to see: the picture, perfect family tableau, untouchable and triumphant. Rows of supporters leaned forward in their chairs, phones raised high, desperate to capture a moment they believed belonged to history. Their chants swelled like a rehearsed chorus: strength, power, destiny. It was theater disguised as politics, spectacle mistaken for substance. Trump thrived in it, he fed on it. Yet not far away, Jasmine Crockett sat silent. Her eyes were steady, locked not on the glitter or the performance, but on the man himself. In that silence was a storm, the kind of unshakable patience that doesn't need a stage to prove its power. She didn't rise for applause, she didn't shift for cameras, she waited, calm, ready. For a moment, it seemed as though the evening would follow the usual script: Trump center, stage, Ivanka a graceful silhouette, the audience caught in the illusion. But then came the pause. The kind of pause that unsettles even the loudest rooms. Something hung in the air, charged and heavy, like thunder just before it cracks the sky open. Trump leaned toward the microphone, his grin sharpening into something colder. The crowd hushed, waiting for one of his signature quips, the kind designed to belittle, to wound, to reduce an opponent into nothing more than a punchline. And that's when it happened. The words slipped from his lips, sharp enough to slice through the golden glow. An insult, reckless and venomous, hurled across the room, not just at Jasmine, but at everything she represented. Her roots, her identity, her very presence in that space. Gasps rippled like a sudden wind. The performance cracked. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her stillness became the loudest thing in the room, her silence a defiance greater than any roar. But what happened next left the entire nation in disbelief. Trump leaned into the microphone, his voice rising and falling like a practiced showman. Family, he declared, stretching the word as if it were sacred scripture. That's our strength. That's our backbone. That's why we win. The room roared in approval, hands slapping together, voices lifting his claim into something larger than life. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled, and for a moment, it felt like the message had landed exactly where he wanted. Ivanka stood close by, her polished smile fixed in place, every gesture rehearsed for perfection. She nodded when the crowd expected it, her eyes catching the light in ways that made her seem untouchable. To the casual observer, it was flawless. Daughter beside father, beauty beside bravado, a family fortress unbreakable in its presentation. But if you looked closer, if you studied not the performance but the details between the lines, the cracks began to show. Ivanka's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Her gaze lingered longer than usual on the man she called father, as though searching for a fragment of the man he once was, or bracing for the weight of what he might say next. Her fingers curled ever so slightly at her side, stiff, tense, betraying what her practiced composure tried to conceal. The audience, of course, saw none of it. They were too busy basking in the words, chanting back his claims, soaking in the illusion of invincibility. They wanted to believe that strength was simple, that family could be paraded on stage like a medal earned, rather than a responsibility carried. And then there was Jasmine. Still silent, still watchful. She hadn't moved since the insult had landed moments earlier. No eye roll, no gasp, no visible reaction. To those who noticed her, it was unsettling. How could she remain so composed under a direct strike? To those who missed it, her silence would soon become impossible to ignore. Trump continued, his tone shifting from triumphant to taunting. He painted himself as a man chosen by destiny, a patriarch who embodied everything the nation needed. Every sentence dripped with arrogance, every pause filled with smug assurance that no one in that room could challenge him. He thought the narrative was his alone to control. But tension has a way of crawling into the smallest spaces, of making itself known even when unspoken. The atmosphere in the ballroom, beneath the cheers and the applause, began to thicken. Jasmine's silence had weight. Ivanka's unease had texture. Even Trump's certainty began to feel overplayed, stretched thin against the cracks forming in his perfect picture. It was in those moments of stillness, between his boasts, beneath the cheers, that the story began to shift. Because strength isn't proven in the words shouted from a stage, but in the truths revealed when the spotlight burns hottest. And that spotlight was about to turn in an unexpected direction. The crowd believed they were witnessing yet another performance of power, another night where Trump dominated the headlines and controlled the narrative. But something unspoken was happening, subtle but unstoppable. Jasmine's patience, Ivanka's restraint, the cracks in the golden facade. They were aligning, creating a tension that no applause could drown out. Little did they know, the perfect picture was about to shatter. Trump gripped the podium like it was his throne, his chest puffed out, his words rolling over the audience in waves of self-congratulation. He didn't just speak, he proclaimed, as though each sentence were etched into stone tablets meant to last forever. Every gesture was a performance, the open hands meant to signal generosity, the pointed finger meant to slice through dissent, the sudden pauses time to let his audience fill the silence with cheers. "Look at what we've built," he thundered, voice dripping with triumph. "Look at this family, standing strong, never bending, never breaking. People said we couldn't do it, but we did. And we'll keep winning, because no one has ever seen strength like this before." The crowd erupted again, chants thundering in unison. They weren't just spectators. They were believers, intoxicated by the spectacle of certainty. Trump knew it. He leaned into it. This was his stage, his kingdom, his illusion of invincibility. And beside him, like a jewel carefully placed in a crown, stood Ivanka. Her presence was deliberate. Every detail calibrated: the flawless dress, the immaculate hair, the soft smile that signaled grace even as her father barked with arrogance. She was the polished shield, the proof he wielded that his empire wasn't just built on bluster, but on beauty, sophistication, and family unity. Yet behind the elegance there was something else. Her hands clasped tightly in front of her, knuckles faintly whitening with the strain. Her smile, while dazzling under the lights, flickered ever so slightly at the edges. Her eyes darted, not often, but just enough to betray a tremor of unease. Trump, oblivious or unconcerned, barreled on. His words grew heavier, less about ideas, more about himself. "They can't touch us. They can't break us. We are untouchable. America knows it, the world knows it." Every boast added bricks to the wall he built around himself, a fortress of ego that no dissent was allowed to breach. The illusion worked because it was layered: the father as the titan, the daughter as the emblem of poise, the crowd as the chorus of validation. Together, they created a portrait of power that dazzled on the surface but cracked under scrutiny. Still, the arrogance was undeniable. It wasn't just confidence. It was the presumption of destiny. Trump didn't speak like a man defending ideas. He spoke like a man convinced the future itself had bent to his will. His every word was steeped in entitlement, in the belief that his name alone was synonymous with victory. Ivanka played her part, standing in the glow of his monologue like a silent reinforcement of everything he claimed. To many, she was the soft balance, the touch of grace that made his bluster palatable. But to those who watched closely, she was something else: a mask trembling at the edges, a shield cracking beneath the weight of the man she was meant to defend. And that was the truth of their power. It wasn't iron, it wasn't steel. It was glass, shiny, polished, impressive under golden light, but fragile when tested. Their invincibility existed only as long as the crowd believed, as long as no one stood to expose the illusion. Trump's voice grew louder, reaching for another crescendo. He raised his arms, basking in the glow of adoration, the applause washing over him like fuel. To the crowd, he was the hero of his own story. To himself, he was untouchable. But arrogance has a way of blinding even the sharpest eyes. In his certainty, Trump couldn't see the cracks forming. In her silence, Ivanka couldn't contain the tremor of doubt. Together, they embodied the illusion of power at its peak, grand, golden, but hollow beneath the shine. And across from them sat someone who knew the truth. While Trump basked in the glow of his self-made mythology, Jasmine Crockett remained still, her composure radiating a different kind of strength. She didn't need to clap back with theatrics, didn't need to match his volume or his gestures. Her silence was not weakness, it was restraint, a quiet storm gathering power. This wasn't the first time Jasmine had faced giants. Her entire career had been shaped by standing where she wasn't expected to belong, speaking truths others tried to bury. Born outside the gilded circles of privilege, she had carved her place with grit and determination. Her story was not one of inheritance but of fight. She had grown up watching people with less be treated as less, and she'd made it her mission to turn that injustice into fuel. Every courtroom she'd entered, every committee hearing where she had pressed her case, had been another round in a battle stacked against her. She was used to being underestimated. In fact, she had learned to thrive on it. The smirks of condescension, the dismissive interruptions, the attempts to silence her, these had become the fire that hardened her resolve. Where Trump shouted his dominance, Jasmine quietly gathered evidence. Where he demanded loyalty, she demanded truth. That history was etched in her presence now. Sitting in that ballroom, eyes fixed on the man at the podium, she didn't see a titan. She saw a pattern, one she'd recognized 100 times before, a man mistaking bluster for substance, mistaking applause for righteousness. She'd seen it in corrupt officials, in arrogant executives, in power-hungry figures who believed intimidation could replace integrity. Every one of them had believed themselves invincible. Until someone like Jasmine stood in their path. The audience might not have known her full story, but they felt something in the way she held herself. She didn't flinch under Trump's insult. She didn't avert her gaze or mask her reaction with a nervous smile. Instead, she embodied the quiet defiance of someone who had faced worse and prevailed. The steadiness in her eyes became louder than the cheers in the room. It was this contrast that built admiration: Trump's noise versus Jasmine's calm. His empire of golden lights versus her foundation of lived truth. He relied on spectacle, she relied on substance. He needed to be heard, she only needed the right moment to speak. Jasmine's power wasn't in matching Trump's volume. It was in dismantling the very stage he stood on. Her silence was calculated, her patience sharpened by years of knowing that arrogance always leaves an opening. Where others rushed to respond, Jasmine waited. And in that waiting, she gained ground. Every second she stayed quiet, the tension in the room thickened. Every moment she refused to react, the cracks in Trump's illusion grew wider. To Jasmine, silence was not absence, it was preparation. It was the steady breath before the strike, the gathering of strength before the release. Her stillness unsettled precisely because it suggested something greater was coming, something far more powerful than the bluster across the stage. The nation watching would soon understand what her composure meant. It wasn't passivity, it was resolve. And when she finally did break that silence, it wouldn't be with noise. It would be with truth. Truth that cuts deeper than insults, that lingers longer than applause, that reshapes the story in a way arrogance cannot undo. Her eyes remained fixed, unwavering, as if she were already dissecting Trump's words, already preparing the counterweight that would topple his performance. She didn't need the crowd to validate her strength was self-made, forged in the fires of every trial she had endured. That authenticity gave her something Trump could never fake: credibility. And that credibility, that calm patience, was about to collide with Trump's inflated ego in a way no one in that ballroom could have predicted. The golden lights, the roaring chants, the illusion of invincibility, all of it would soon bend under the weight of a voice sharpened by experience, truth, and courage. For now Jasmine remained quiet, the embodiment of restraint and readiness. Her silence was not the absence of power, it was the gathering of it. And when she finally spoke, the world stopped to listen. Trump's voice boomed, louder now, as though sheer volume could hammer his point into permanence. "We are the strongest family in America," he declared, slapping the podium for emphasis. The audience roared in agreement, their cheers swelling like an anthem. He said it again, slower this time, savoring each word. "The strongest family in America." The repetition was his weapon, his mantra. He wanted it etched into memory, carved into headlines. Ivanka, standing just a step behind, nodded dutifully, her smile locked in place. But the tremor in her hand betrayed the truth. This performance was costing her more than the audience could see. Trump leaned forward, feeding off the noise. "No one can touch us. No one can match us. No one even comes close. We are America's strength." His arms stretched wide as if embracing the entire nation. And then, cutting through the theater like a blade, came a voice. "Strength isn't inherited, Mr. Trump. It's earned." The words were sharp, measured, and undeniable. They belonged to Jasmine Crockett. For the first time she broke her silence. Gasps rippled through the room. Heads turned, cameras swung. The audience caught between disbelief and anticipation. Trump froze mid-gesture, his eyes narrowing as though someone had broken an unspoken law. The golden performance cracked, and all it took was one sentence. Trump snapped back, his tone rising like a whip. "Excuse me. You don't interrupt me. You don't have the right to." His voice broke into a yell, his face flushing red. But Jasmine didn't flinch. Her gaze remained steady, her tone calm, almost gentle. "Family is not a crown you pass down, nor a stage you rehearse. It's sacrifice, it's truth, and America knows the difference." The room fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by the clicking of cameras desperate to capture every flicker of expression. Trump leaned forward, jabbing his finger in her direction. "You don't know strength! You don't know what it takes to win! You're nothing but." He stopped short, his words collapsing into anger too crude to finish. Ivanka shifted uncomfortably beside him, her polished composure now visibly cracking. Her eyes darted toward Jasmine, then back to her father, as if torn between the loyalty she performed and the truth she couldn't deny. Her fingers curled tighter, a subtle quake betraying her inner turmoil. Jasmine's calmness became unbearable in its contrast. Where Trump shouted, she remained still. Where he lashed out, she leaned in with measured resolve. And that composure made her words resonate louder than his yelling ever could. "You shout about strength," she said evenly, "but shouting doesn't make it real. America has seen strength, and it doesn't look like this." The audience stirred, caught between the gravitational pull of Trump's bluster and the quiet authority in Jasmine's tone. For the first time, the room no longer belonged solely to him. The illusion of invincibility faltered. Trump's fists clenched, his voice rising again. "You're wrong. You don't know this country like I do! You don't know what it takes!" His words spilled out like a man trying to hold back the tide with bare hands. But Jasmine, unshaken, let a pause linger, a silence so heavy it demanded attention. Then, with precision, she leaned forward and asked the question that froze the room. The silence stretched like a wire pulled taut. Every breath in the room caught somewhere between anticipation and dread. Trump's chest heaved, his face flushed with rage, but Jasmine's voice cut through the tension like steel slicing silk. "Tell them," she said slowly, each syllable crisp and deliberate, "who Baron's real mother is?" The words landed like an earthquake. For a heartbeat, the room stood still, and then chaos erupted. Gasps tore through the crowd, reporters lurched forward, flashes exploded from cameras as if the truth itself had ignited the air. The chant of "strongest family" that had once filled the ballroom collapsed into stunned murmurs. Trump froze, his jaw tightening, his eyes widening with a fury he could barely contain. He gripped the podium with such force the wood seemed to groan beneath his hands. "That's a disgusting lie!" he roared, his voice cracking under the weight of panic. How dare you bring my son into this? You're sick. You're twisted." But Jasmine didn't flinch. Her calm was her weapon, and she wielded it masterfully. She rose to her feet, her movements deliberate, and placed a slim black folder on the table before her. The moment the folder touched the surface, the room seemed to tilt toward her, all eyes magnetized to what might lie within. "I don't deal in rumors, Mr. Trump," she said softly, her voice carrying with the clarity of truth. "I deal in evidence." Ivanka, standing rigid behind her father, went pale. Her perfect mask began to crack, her lips parting as if to protest, yet no words came. Her hands trembled, fingers twitching nervously against her side. She knew, or perhaps she feared she knew. Trump pounded the podium again, his voice rising to a fever pitch. "Fake! Fake documents, fake news, fake everything! This is all a setup, another witch hunt! Nobody believes this garbage!" He gestured frantically toward the audience, searching for the validation that had always been his shield. But this time, the cheers didn't come. The crowd wasn't roaring, they were whispering, doubting, straining to see what Jasmine had brought into the light. With surgical precision, Jasmine opened the folder. Her hand moved without haste, each motion weighted with authority. Out slid the first sheet, a notarized affidavit, then another, a hospital record, and then the one that made the room gasp aloud. A DNA report, the bold letters and numbers clear even from a distance. "This," Jasmine continued, her voice unwavering, "isn't about smears or rumors. It's about facts. Facts you've tried to bury. Facts the American people deserve to know. You say you are the strongest family in America. But the foundation of your story, your golden image, is built on lies." The room pulsed with disbelief. Phones shot into the air, live streams buzzed, hashtags already forming in real time. The illusion Trump had painted so carefully was dissolving before their eyes. Trump lurched forward, pointing an accusatory finger at Jasmine. His voice cracked into a near scream. "That's fake! You're a fraud! A disgrace! This is all doctored, all planted. My family is perfect. My son is mine." But the more he screamed, the smaller he seemed. His towering confidence shrank with every shout, his face twisting into desperation. Ivanka stood frozen, her polished composure shattered, her eyes glassy as though the ground beneath her had shifted forever. Jasmine did not yell back. She did not falter. Instead, she turned her head deliberately, not toward Trump, but toward the cameras, toward the nation, toward the millions watching who had been told for years that truth was negotiable. "America," she said, her voice calm yet piercing, "you deserve honesty. No more smoke. No more mirrors. No more lies wrapped in gold. Tonight you see the truth for yourselves." The audience was no longer Trump's. The tide had shifted, the air no longer vibrated with chants of loyalty but with the stunned silence of revelation. Some supporters covered their mouths, others exchanged frantic whispers, but one thing was undeniable: the spotlight had left Trump and found Jasmine. Trump bellowed, pounding the podium again, desperate to pull the narrative back. "Don't listen to her! She's lying! She's always lying! This is the deep state, the media, the radicals! They'll do anything to tear me down!" His words tumbled over each other, incoherent, frantic. But Jasmine only waited. She let the noise of his desperation fill the room, let the cameras catch every wild gesture, every crack in his mask. Then when the frenzy peaked, she spoke again, her voice slicing through like a bell in a storm. "You can scream fake all you want," she said, her eyes locked on the lens. "But evidence doesn't need your approval. Truth doesn't bow to your volume." The audience erupted. Not in chants, but in applause. Slow at first, hesitant, then building, swelling, as more and more people recognized the shift. The energy had moved. The momentum was hers. Trump's face contorted with rage, his hands slamming the podium until Ivanka reached out, almost reflexively, to steady him. Her fingers lingered for a second, trembling, before pulling away, as if she knew even her presence couldn't hold the image together any longer. Jasmine straightened her back, closing the folder with a quiet finality. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to gloat. Her calmness was louder than any of Trump's theatrics, her composure a mirror that reflected his unraveling. And then, with the room on edge, the nation hanging on her every word, Jasmine slid one last document from the folder, a single sheet sealed with the unmistakable mark of the court. She held it up, her hand steady, her gaze unwavering. And then, the narrator's voice would echo in living rooms across America. She dropped the proof no one could deny. The studio was no longer a stage. It had become an earthquake zone, every gasp, every murmur, every sideways glance a tremor rippling outward. The audience shifted restlessly in their seats, caught between disbelief and dawning recognition. Some whispered furiously, others pressed their palms to their mouths, but more than a few began to clap. Hesitant at first, then firmer, sharper, as though acknowledging what their eyes could not unsee. The cameras didn't miss a moment. Red lights blinked, lenses zoomed, the broadcast feeding live into millions of homes. And within seconds, the ripple in the studio began to swell into a tidal wave across the country. Phones lit up like fireflies in the dark, screens glowing as viewers at home clipped, tweeted, streamed, and shared the moment Jasmine had stood, folder in hand, and declared her truth. Did that just happen? One tweet read, "She brought the receipts." Another posted, racking up retweets by the second. Within minutes, Fat Jasmine bombshell was trending worldwide. Trump's shouts still filled the studio, but they no longer commanded the room. His rage, once electrifying to his supporters, now sounded hollow, like the angry protests of a man watching his fortress crumble. He pounded the desk, barked at the cameras, demanded the mic be cut, but his fury was swallowed by the collective gasp of a nation witnessing the unmasking of power. And beside him, Ivanka sat motionless. Her stillness was louder than any of his roars. Her painted calm had been her armor, but now it looked like glass. Thin, fragile, ready to shatter. She did not deny, she did not speak, she simply stared ahead, pale and stiff, her silence telling a story far more powerful than words could. It was the silence of someone who knew the storm could no longer be contained. In living rooms from New York to Los Angeles, in cafes, in airport lounges, people leaned closer to their screens, their voices echoing the shock. She said, "What? Did you hear that? Is it true?" The disbelief melted quickly into validation. Finally, someone stood up to him. Finally, someone called out the lie. Cable news channels scrambled to keep up. Headlines flashed across the bottom of the screen, Buriakim GI. Jasmine Crockett degropshi shirauke silam olavi TV farli sigrastirite. Siraka TT Sarais tu inishenji THRH bar pundits were already piling in, their voices urgent, almost breathless. "This is unprecedented," one declared. "We have never seen a political family confronted like this on live television." Another countered, "If these documents hold up, this is not just a scandal, it's a collapse of narrative." Back in the studio, the host sat frozen, torn between protocol and awe. His notes useless now. The show had slipped from his grasp, and yet no one cared. The story wasn't his to control anymore. It belonged to Jasmine, to the audience, to the millions tweeting, posting, and whispering across the globe. Trump, red-faced and panting, shouted again, "This is illegal! She'll pay for this! Everyone here will regret it!" His words landed like empty shells, their noise loud but their impact diminished. Each outburst only widened the chasm between him and the audience, between the man who once dominated every camera, and the woman who now held the nation's attention with nothing but composure, and Jasmine. She didn't need to add another word. She sat calmly, the closed folder before her, her expression steady. Every moment she remained silent was another blow to Trump's unraveling authority. Where he flailed, she anchored. Where he screamed, she waited. And that patience resonated, because it mirrored the patience of millions who had waited years to see someone stand in front of him and not flinch. On Twitter, the commentary surged like wildfire. Strength isn't volume. Strength is Jasmine. She just exposed the emperor with no clothes. History was made tonight. Even networks traditionally aligned with Trump struggled to spin the moment. Some hosts stammered, suggesting it was out of bounds, that family should be off limits, but the footage played again and again. The question, the folder, the gasp, the silence of Ivanka. The truth, or at least the suspicion of it, had broken through. By midnight, hashtags had multiplied in truth folder, Fi Ivanka silent, Fay Trump meltdown. TikTok clips replayed Jasmine's calm voice on loop, paired with captions like, "This is how you face a bully." Instagram filled with screenshots of Trump's contorted face, side by side with Jasmine's unshaken calm. The contrast was undeniable, the framing complete, the villain unraveling, the heroine unbothered. In the studio, the weight of that framing pressed heavy. The audience no longer looked to Trump for cues, they looked to Jasmine. And in that shift was something irreversible, a transfer of authority, a fracture in the image of invincibility he had crafted for decades. As the cameras caught Ivanka's stillness, her pale face, her trembling hands, It became a symbol of the night. Not just a daughter's silence, but the silence of a dynasty cracking from within. A silence louder than denial, louder than rage, louder even than Trump's roar. And while the studio buzzed with chaos, while the pundits shouted into their mics, while the tweets multiplied by the second, one truth echoed again and again across living rooms, headlines, and timelines. Twitter was on fire within minutes. The roar of chaos was still vibrating in the air when Jasmine leaned into the microphone, her voice steady but charged with something that cut deeper than scandal. She didn't raise her tone, she didn't need to. The room fell into a fragile silence, and even the cameras seemed to pause, hungry for her next words. "This isn't about family gossip," she said, her gaze sweeping the crowd, then piercing through the camera into the millions watching at home. "This is about accountability." The words landed with a gravity that shifted the mood. What had felt like a tabloid headline a moment ago now took on the weight of civic responsibility. She held her ground, eyes unflinching. Because if a man in power is willing to lie about something so personal, so intimate, then you better believe he will lie about matters of state. About your money. About your safety. About your future. The audience erupted, not in shock this time, but in affirmation. A wave of applause rolled across the studio, a sound less of surprise and more of solidarity. People stood, clapping harder, some shouting, "That's right," others simply nodded, faces lit with the recognition of a truth they'd long felt but never heard voiced so clearly. Trump's face reddened, his lips curled in another outburst, but it was drowned out. His words, once magnetic, had lost their pull. The cameras didn't cut to him, they lingered on Jasmine, the contrast between rage and reason as sharp as lightning splitting the night. Jasmine pressed on. "This isn't about one man or one family. This is about a pattern, how corruption always begins small, always hides in the shadows of what looks perfect. But tonight proves that no matter how powerful the illusion, the truth will always fight its way to the surface." The applause swelled again, and for the first time that evening, Jasmine allowed herself a small, knowing smile. Not smug, not triumphant, but the smile of someone who had carried the weight of silence long enough and finally set it down. She turned slightly, not to Trump, not even to Ivanka, but to the audience, the people in the studio and the millions beyond it. Leaders may come and go. Their wealth, their slogans, their stage lights, they all fade. But truth outlives power, always. The words seemed to hang in the air, etched into the silence that followed. For a brief moment, the entire nation seemed to inhale together. The moral was clear, unshakable. A leader who hides behind lies cannot be trusted with the lives of a people. A dynasty built on secrecy cannot stand against the weight of transparency. And a woman with nothing but her voice, her calm, and her proof had reminded America of something it had almost forgotten: that power is fragile. But truth is eternal. The cameras zoomed closer on Jasmine's face, catching the calm glow of conviction. She didn't need the final word, she had already spoken it. The rest belonged to history. And in that moment, as the applause thundered and Trump's shouts dissolved into background noise, the story transcended the scandal. It was no longer about one family or one night, it was about the moral arc of leadership itself. About how truth once spoken could never again be unsaid, because no matter how loud the lies, no matter how gilded the illusion, the truth had just proved it could still command the room. And the world was listening. And so, the spectacle ended not with Trump's booming voice or Ivanka's polished silence, but with the calm, unshakable courage of one woman. What began as a golden stage crafted to display untouchable power had been undone in a single night, shattered by truth laid bare. Trump and Ivanka entered as a dynasty draped in invincibility, but they left diminished, exposed, shaken, and smaller than they had ever appeared before. Jasmine Crockett did not need the lights, the chance, or the illusion of perfection. She needed only her voice, her patience, and her proof. And in wielding them, she reminded the nation that true power lies not in arrogance but in accountability. Not in deception, but in dignity. Because this was never just about family secrets. It was about the principle that leaders who lie in their private lives will lie in their public ones. It was about reminding America that truth is not fragile. It endures, it resists, and when spoken with courage, it can still bring the mighty to their knees. The moral is clear, and it echoes far beyond this moment. Dignity will always outshine arrogance, and truth will always outlive lies. One woman's calm defiance proved it. One woman's voice shifted the balance. And now the responsibility rests with us, to listen. To remember. To demand that those in power answer not to wealth or illusion, but to truth. If you believe that power must always answer to truth, then subscribe, share this story. Let it ripple further than any lie ever could. Because sometimes, the quietest voice carries the loudest echo. And tonight, that echo belongs to Jasmine,